I request all the students to keep their phone on silent. The guests are arriving.
Please sit down.
A very good morning to one and all present here. We Kaushiki and Shah Faisal are pleased to cordially welcome each one of you to this much anticipated international seminar jointly organized by Indian Maritime University and Erasmus University UPT Rotterdam that focuses on the theme competitive landscape of the maritime industry.
A major objective of ours as graduates is to specialize in ports, shipping and logistics. So we consider ourselves fortunate to be given this opportunity to attend such an educational event, which we hope will enrich our understanding and insights by hearing speakers from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. The invited speakers will dwell on the dynamics of port management and supply chain management. Our in-house speaker will talk about Maritime India Vision 2030, focusing on Government of India's initiative for decarbonization in the maritime sector. Discussions will encompass modern port practices, supply chain resilience, and India's vision for a sustainable, digitized maritime sector. This collaboration offers a platform for cross-cultural learning, fostering positive transformation in the maritime industry.
Without further ado, I would like to invite our campus director, Rear Admiral Amit Bose, to graciously welcome this gathering.
Mr. Balasubramaniam, Mr. Karunesan, heads of the departments, professors, associate professors, faculty members, dear students of IMA Chennai campus, a very hearty good morning. It's a proud privilege for me to welcome the two eminent speakers today, Dr. Maurice Jensen, a senior researcher at Erasmus UPT, and Dr. Albert Winstra, who is the Professor of Trade and Logistics at the Rotterdam School of Management of Erasmus University. I would, on behalf of the entire students community, the faculty and the department at IMA Chennai campus, thank you for accepting our invitation and coming over to give us this talk. I would also like to welcome all the directors, faculty members and students of the other IMA Chennai campuses who have joined us online. I hope that you are able to have a good connectivity and able to view the proceedings which are going on here. The topic of today's talk, that is contemporary landscape of maritime industry, is highly germane because of its dynamism and inherent upheavals that are intrinsic to this particular industry. There are mergers and acquisitions, geopolitics, the adoption of the latest generation technologies, whether it is AI, data analytics, you have blockchain, you have IoT. All of these are playing a major role in transforming the maritime industry. The national imperatives like the MIV 2030 is also playing a major role, and the complete nation is aware about the role that we have to play and augment our infrastructure to ensure that our maritime trade grows, and it has to grow in leaps and bounds to achieve the 5 trillion kind of an economy that we are aiming for 2030. I'm sure that the talk by the two visiting faculties would be quite enlightening to us, and I would urge upon the entire student community here, those who are present here physically as well as those who are attending this seminar through this online mechanism, to associate yourself, to actively participate in the discussions and enlighten and broaden your knowledge domain in this particular field. I also hope that this interaction today is an enriching experience for all of us here. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon our Director, Chennai Campus, Rear Admiral Amit Bose, to felicitate the invited speakers from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Mr. Morris Jansen. Professor Albert Wienstra.
May I now call upon Dr. B. Swaminathan, Head School of Maritime Management, to felicitate our Director, Chennai Campus, Rear Admiral Amit Bose, who has been instrumental in guiding this memorable event.
Thank you, sir. May I now request all the dignitaries on the dais to kindly occupy the front row below in the auditorium. Now, I take the privilege of presenting a brief profile of our first speaker of the session, Mr. Morris Jansen. He is an expert in port strategy, management, environment, emphasizing the human factor in port city development. He focuses on sustainable development and innovative education at Erasmus UPT. Mr. Morris' expertise spans over inclusive port development, coordination and partnership, development, and zero-waste supply chain. He views ports and cities as hubs for talent and innovation, supporting breakthrough solutions. Mr. Morris excels in facilitating, moderating, coaching, and capturing knowledge in creative ways. We are now invite Mr. Morris Jansen to enlighten us on the topic port management.
Is this on?
Should I switch it on?
Yes. Yeah, working? Perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks for the invitation and also for organizing this seminar. It's great to see so many people interested, both in this room and I think also online. Yeah, so let's see what knowledge we can bring together today. My presentation is about an ecosystems approach to port development. It is basically on the basis of a publication which just came out on last July with the same topic. So I did send the paper to one of your faculty members, well, I hope you like it. I hope it is also going to inspire you. This is a little bit about my background. Is there any screen for you? Ah, okay. Yeah, I was wondering, where are you looking at? Of course to me, but it helps if you have a PowerPoint that you can see the PowerPoint. Yeah, so let me check. Yes. Flips a little bit. Yeah, this one. Otherwise you click, yeah? I don't have any animations. Yeah, I work at Erasmus University. I'm a researcher, but also I'm a passionate windsurfer. So I like to be on the water, like maybe many of you. And I also paint in my free time. I also am the co-founder of a inter-faculty, inter-university center for port city futures. So we look at port cities as ecosystems. So not just the port, but also the communities around it. And basically that also starts my presentation. Maybe you can click through. What is on the agenda for today? I will give you a perspective on ports and ecosystems. What are ecosystems and how do you understand better the value that comes from the ecosystem? And why is it important for port authorities and for port managers, basically? And that really relates to the motivation and actionability to take care of your ecosystem in such a way that it is competitive, but it's also a place to live. If there is no place to live, maybe people would not want to be willing in that port. So you have to really balance the ecosystem values. I will explain that in a bit more detail. Also, we will talk about stakeholder engagement and how you can create value together. And lastly, I will conclude with a new role for port development in implementing the SDGs. Maybe you are familiar with the SDGs. I will also explain a little bit how that works. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, I did organize a Mentimeter. Next slide, please. Yeah, I did organize a Mentimeter. I'll come back to that. That's the next slide. What is port development actually? Well, in my view, if you're a port development company, you want to, of course, grow that port by bringing volumes, cargo volumes, into that port. So a port developer basically develops ports in four ways. The first step is that you design and construct a port, a breakwater, quay walls, access roads, railways, everything, all the amenities, all the facilities that you need. The next step is you operate, you bring in the ships, you bring in the tugboats, you bring in the trucks and the railways, and you also emit a lot of CO2 emissions. Yeah, most ports in the world, they are kind of business clusters, very active business clusters, but all together they emit a lot of CO2 and greenhouse gases. So it's not very sustainable. So we have to think about it. The third is that you have to think about refurbishing a port. Because at some time, maybe the access channel becomes too shallow, or there is a different type of ship in the market, or a complete area becomes abandoned because it doesn't really bring value anymore for business. So what do you do with it? Are you leaving that to waste, or are you going to recycle it or refurbish that land in such a way that it will generate new value? And what kind of activities can you bring in there? as an alternative. And the fourth step is that you return a specific port area back to society. It could be that maybe a real estate developer wants to build houses on the waterfront that used to be port areas. Those are things that basically you can do as a port developer. What is not really in the picture, if you read about port development in international literature, in scientific literature, is the ecosystem as such, the coastal or the river ecosystem. And the question is why not? And what happens if you don't factor that in? Of course, if you want to make a kind of a public-private partnership arrangement, you want to make that bankable. Yeah? You want to find investors who can really step in as an investor and make money from the project. And of course, the more you factor in terms of ecological, let's say, quality, for example, what do you do with the coral reefs? What do you do with the beaches? How do you make it accessible to people? It becomes, of course, a kind of a trade-off between livability and profitability. That's something I would like to talk about also. And I think the ecosystems must be at the core of any approach to sustainably develop a port area. Next slide. My question to you, well, I wanted to do this interactive, but you don't have the web link, so maybe we do it like raise your finger and raise your hand. And what do you think is the role of a port authority? And the second question, what is the main performance indicator of a port authority? Who wants to step up and share some of your already existing knowledge?
Landlord port.
Yes? Landlord port, yeah? In Arasu says landlord port. A landlord is a role you can play. Are there any other roles that you can play as a port authority? Maybe one of the students? I see you discussed it, yeah? Show compliance with the IMO conventions. Yes, that's a very important role, especially through the role as a port state control. You have a specific role to look after the type of ships that come in. That's a good point.
Make money for the investor.
Huh?
Make money for the investor.
Make money for the investor, yeah. Yeah, that's an important performance indicator. Okay, very good. I think there are more roles that you can play as a port authority. Let's move on to the next one. Yeah, but what's also happening nowadays in the news, and this is from well, not so long ago, is that we are suffering on our planet with quite some devastation of ecosystems, and that also happens mainly in coastal areas where ports are being built. You see extinction of species, you see biodiversity loss, you see nature loss, and at the same time you see human activity increasing more and more, which is of course natural because waterborne transport is the cheapest way of moving goods across the world, and that brings prosperity. But prosperity doesn't have to go at the cost of your environment and the biodiversity. I think this is my understanding, and I see also a lot of witness from ports around the world that have analyzed 100 ports that do see some commitment to the sustainable development goals in a way that you bring profit indeed for the investors, but you also make sure that and below the societal layer is the biosphere. Actually, it means, in summary, that the economy, if you want to prosper, you have to also address the values for the society, because society provides for economical development, and the biosphere provides for the society to have human activity. That is fundamental. Next slide. Yeah, I give you some example. Here you see a small place in Indonesia you see is like a river system. It's a rainforest area, and there is some palm oil fields on the top left of it. And the Indonesian government wants to develop a port in this place. Of course, what are the tensions there? Of course, these people will get new jobs, yeah, which is good. But it also comes at the expense of the biodiversity and maybe also the community relocation. What do you do? Yeah, so it is always double. That is the point that I try to make. Port development also comes with trade-offs and also sometimes with contradictions. You're adding value here, but you're losing value there. And that is the sustainable aspect that needs to come into the picture of port developers. In port development, we tend to do the opposite. Next slide. The same here, this is the port operations, one of the pictures in Rotterdam. You see a lot of dust, you see noise, you see light pollution, you see air pollution, and ports indeed. Yeah, this is Rotterdam, so it's deep water, big ships, and at the same time also exhausting NOx, SOx, and fine particles into the air. Is that inevitable, or can we prevent that? Well, we do a lot of effort in funding projects, bankable projects, to go to zero emission in Port of Rotterdam. And a lot of other ports are doing the same. So yes, it is a contradiction, but at the same time, we're trying to reach that ambition as well. Next slide. Well, this is a similar, it comes with the ballast water. The shipping people know that. The ballast water treatment system needs to be on board of a ship in order to prevent species from traveling from India to Europe and then wasting, let's say, the endemic species in Europe, or the vice versa. Yeah, so you want to control, let's say, the life below water, and you can protect that by ballast water treatment systems in the port. A very simple technical solution and a workable solution. Of course, ship companies are not very happy about it because they need to pay for the facilities to the port authority. But yeah, it's inevitable. You need to make sure that you clean up your waste, including the ballast water. Next slide. So the question is ecosystem services. We see what are we talking about? We see the biosphere, the society, economy. If you look at this picture, this is a Monet picture, coastal city in France. I was visiting that a few years ago, and you see that this place has a very important value. It's cultural heritage. Because of the painting, everybody goes to this place, because Monet was there, the big famous painter. It has some recreational values because of that. Yeah? So people earn money by tourism. And of course it's also a space for people to live there. It has a kind of a sense of space. If you talk with French people, they really feel connected to this place. And we also see school buses going there. Yeah? So it also has educational value. And most importantly, it has conservational value, because what will happen if that rock over there will break down? Well, this is a kind of a really important part of this little harbor. This little rock and this painting all connect with each other. So if you would break down that rock, this place would lose its value. Yeah. So there is invisible value usually in the ecosystem. And that is something that we need to understand much more. We can go further. You can go further, please. Next slide. Yeah, so what I did in this this was just an example, but what I did with these 212 projects in the World Port Sustainability Program database, which is set up by the IAPH, the International Association of Ports and Harbors, connects some 250 different ports across the world. 100 ports have filed their projects in this database. And I analyzed some 212 projects. And I kind of categorized them in, let's say, how they contribute to the biosphere, the society, and the economy. And then you see all the listed ecosystem values. One of the most, let's say, simple ones is, of course, route of transportation. If you have a river, if you have a waterway, if you have an ocean, it provides for transport. And that is why, let's say, shipping is a kind of a preferred, let's say, mode of transport because it's so cheap. And it is so cheap because the ocean connects continents to each other, right? So that in itself, the fact that UNCLOS also says, International Convention by the United Nations, the ocean is a free good. We don't have to pay for using the ocean. So this is really the fundamental element of shipping, that everybody can access the sea and everybody can use the sea. This in itself is the ecosystem service, basically. And of course there's many other examples there, which I will elaborate on a little bit further. You can go on, please. So what do you need to do if you want to develop a port? Yeah? So now coming back to the business perspective, if you want to make a project bankable, a port development project, what you usually do is you look at the economical costs of investing, dredging, accessways, or making land accessible, flattening it out, put some asphalt on it, make sure that there are access roads, and a lot of other factors are not there yet. Yeah, so the green ones that you see on this picture on the left usually are factored out, and we call them let's say negative externalities. We know that those costs are there, but we don't pay for it. Yeah, so take for example, if you want to invest in a truck, you can invest in a diesel truck. You say, okay, that's nice, but you know that the diesel is exhausting SOx, NOx, and CO2. So yes, the truck is cheaper. That's because we don't pay for the negative externalities. We don't pay for the CO2 costs. Yeah, so what you now see is going to be a shift, especially in Europe, where the European Commission says, no, we're going to charge you for the CO2 emissions. So in the new business model, some of these externalities will be factored in order to make the diesel truck and the electrical truck much more comparable, so people will choose to buy. First, the four stages of port development, yeah, design, construct, operate, refurbish, and return. The way it interacts with society, yeah, so you're sharing spaces, you're sharing resources with society. Yeah, you for example, claim land, and the land is then used for economic activities. You basically use employment, and in return, of course, you pay for these people a decent wage. The exchanges between society, economy. And this is quite important because we have some concepts also in the literature that says something about licenses. You get a license, not a driver's license, but similar to that. You get a license from the society to develop something. A clear example, what happening in UK last week, was in the news about water treatment across UK on the beach or close to the beach areas. Say, we don't buy this anymore. The water treatment companies have been privatized 20, 30 years ago, and they don't, let's say, invest in proper waste treatment installations year over year. Yeah, so they become, let's say, out of use and broken down. As a result, all the waste flows into the ocean. This is typically the license to operate. The people say, we need to have action now from the government because these companies are not, let's say, acting upon their responsibilities. And as a port authority, you need to really take care of that as well. I'm also in discussion with the municipality of Rotterdam about noise from ships, inland ships passing through the city of Rotterdam. And there you see the same principle. The municipality is saying, hey, we need to cut down the noise. They need to go to onshore power supply of the ships, so that the noise in the night or during loading and unloading goes down or even goes to zero. And of course the Port Authority says, yeah, but the barge vessels, they have to invest in onshore power supply or in electrical ships, and they don't have the money. Yeah, so this is also kind of a tension where you see different stakeholders standing up saying, yeah, but I want to have my value, to live in this place is, yeah, to not be harmed by noise of ships. And the other says, yeah, but I'm making a living of those barge vessels. So now the whole kind of discussion here is, how can we make sure that these stakeholders cooperate, because there are technical solutions available. It is not like impossible, this whole, let's say, struggle between values, but it is something where stakeholders need to kind of sit together and look at pragmatic solutions instead of trying to get and stay into a conflict situation like you see in the UK at the moment. Yeah, so Sustainable Development Goals, and this is why the Sustainable Development Goals also have a 17th goal. The 17th goal, so SDG 17, is about partnerships. Yeah, so we acknowledge that most of these values bring in some tensions, bring in different stakeholders and different interests, and therefore you need to look at what is the mechanism to solve this difficult situation, all these puzzles. Next slide. Next slide. And well, what I did also from a different part of business literature about corporate social responsibility talks about actionability and motivation. The motivation is what is your intrinsic drive to be responsible. Yeah, we talked about compliance, for example. Yeah, compliance is kind of an extrinsic drive. Compliance means you need to have a government who says you have to obey the rules, which is different from saying, hey, there are rules and I know that I can contribute, so I will intrinsically be motivated to do something good for example, let's say the community. Yeah, so there is a tension between what you're liable to do according to the law and what you are responsible think you should do. Yeah, so this is the difference between the do no harm and the do good. And then there is another element between motivation and intrinsic and extrinsic. Are you studying because you want to learn and to grow as a person, or are you studying because your parents told you so? Of course, I hope both. I think both, but I also hope that you intrinsically feel the need to learn and to keep learning during your lifetime. Yeah, so this is the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic. And a person in, let's say, a personal sphere is not different than a person in a business. The strange thing about the theory about this is, and this is done also in the Rotterdam School of Management, they studied decision behavior of professionals and decision behavior of the same professionals in their personal life. And they make different decisions. So when they start making decisions for their company, they act more, let's say, driven by profit and not driven by the responsible aspects. So the other values next to profitability, which is quite strange. But yeah, that's also business behavior. Next slide. Of San Diego started engaging with education institutes and developed a whole ecosystem around blue economy. This is one of the best examples that I found across the world. Also very thoroughly assessed in did it make an impact. And I think this kind of programs where business, port authority, technology companies and startups really find, let's say, new ways of making money. Yeah, because this is all about making money, blue economy. The difference is you make money and take at the same time responsibility for the values from the ocean. And you develop technology on top of that, which you can sell across the world. Yeah. So this is a kind of a typical example, and you see also how it interacts with different parts of the SDGs on different levels of the ecosystem. Next slide. The same with onshore power supply, yeah, where a port authority says to its ship companies, okay, you can use my berth, you can sail into my port, but we want you, extrinsic motivation, to plug in your ship. Yeah? If the port authority doesn't say that to the company, of course the company will not plug in on let's say, onshore supply. It needs to have a cooperation between the port authority and the shipping companies. But it's actually what we call the do no harm motivation. You know that it emits, and you can work together to lower the emissions or move to zero emissions, so that it limits the value from the ecosystem. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we can skip this one considering the time. It's maybe too long discussion. Move, next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so what my last comment, I think I have some 5 minutes still. 2 minutes? Okay. Yeah, so the point I'm making is, and this is not myself, but you see also CEOs like the Port of Rotterdam, the former CEO of the Port of Rotterdam, he now resigned and, because his duty was over. But he said actually, we need to balance competition and collaboration. We first need to collaborate internally within our maritime cluster, within our port ecosystem. And once we do that, we become stronger to compete externally. Typical example is livability, also for students, finding a job, employability. The Port of Rotterdam, like many ports in the world, find it very difficult to attract young people, talented people who want to work and find a career in the port. And that all has to do also with the image. If you have an image which is pollutive in our part of the world, young people that I educate in my class, they want to do good for society. They want to intrinsically contribute to a better world. They see every day on the news that climate change is changing and also their future. And this is something that if you don't appeal to this kind of need of the young people, and you keep, let's say, doing the things you did always, then you're not really using the capabilities from the resources that Port of Rotterdam has. We have beautiful education programs, universities, top of the bill. But how is it that they don't want to work in the port? This has been going on for 25 years. That means also now what you see is that port authorities, businesses, education institutes all work together to really change that profile. And this whole idea about ecosystem thinking is also embedded in literature, especially also in the Harvard Business Review. There have been a couple of articles, including the one from Michael Porter and from Kramer and Fitzer, who really dig deeper into these cluster effects. If you want to know more about that, read Michael Porter's book of the 1990s about cluster, competitive advantage of nations. It's really a strategy book, but and from there he developed this whole ecosystem and shared value concept. So next slide. Yeah, so partnering, what do you do when you really want to contribute to the SDGs? What you normally see is issues are not solved. They are put into a corner of the government. Yeah? So government needs to clean up the streets. Or government needs to set some regulations, which basically says in the same way that, yeah, if you put it into one corner, you're freeing yourself also from taking a responsibility. And what this model says, that this is the partnering space, you first need to understand where is the issue. For example, protecting the coastal, let's say the coral reef in front of the coastline. Who is taking care of that? Who is raising the issue of the protection? Is that a non-governmental organization? Is that civil society? In that whole example with the UK sewage water waste in front of the coastline, it's the civil society, the people who are raising the flag to say, hey, this needs to stop. Whereas actually it should have been the government who would have done a proper job in enforcing the laws, or it even should be the companies to say, hey, but I take responsibility for investing in new installations. So, and if you don't, let's say, have that imbalance, this partnering space, then basically you're losing the ecosystem value. As a result, you end up with a place that is so polluted that nobody wants to live there anymore. So this is really fundamental, I think, to port development. I can give you plenty of examples of issues that you can arise and that are basically not solved because they are not collectively addressed. Next slide. So what we do in our education, we also develop games for education. So what we want to bring that the need to, what is partnering, what is collaboration, what is taking responsibility, what happens if you put a number of people together on the table and try to let them solve a puzzle, a difficult issue. Of course, we can talk about these issues in a classroom like this, and I basically do a very speed lecture here on the topic. But what we want to do is we want to let students experience what happens. What is collaboration, and why is it more effective in solving a problem than doing it by yourself as an individual stakeholder? This is something that we do in these 3 types of games. And we have more of these games that we use in the classroom. Yeah? Next slide. And most of all, we also need leadership. We need business leadership. We should not be only educating young people. We should also educate leaders, or leaders to be, mid-career level. As I said in the beginning, I think this is a society is so dynamic. We need to be on top of the knowledge, and every day you look at the newspapers, you get surprised that the world has changed again. And that means also if you make very important decisions in port development, if you develop a port, the infrastructure is there for 25, maybe 30, 40 years. So this is the next generation that you're building the infrastructure for. That's quite some responsibility. And I think leadership needs to understand that responsibility that they take. Next slide. So my last slide is, what is this Port Authority's role? Coming back to that first question. Yes, indeed, they are landlord. Looking after land leases and port use and making sure that the ships that arrive, they pay their fair share. Of course, we have to be efficient, we have to be reliable, we have to be, let's say, accommodating the volumes, the growing volumes that India will face. I think there will be a presentation about that. But also I think we need to make sure that the port is, let's say, a livable place and a place where people want to work. So I think we need to shift from profit-driven, from client-driven to mission-driven and even community-driven. We need to make sure that the port really is connected with that society. And that these goals are also aligned with each other. Next slide. And that's it. So, if you want to, maybe the last 2 slides more? Yeah, 1 slide more? Or is it the last slide? Yeah, okay. So if you are interested in some of these further readings, of course I can share you also the links to the scientific articles. If the papers are behind a paywall, so we write academic papers and then they put them behind a paywall because the publisher wants to make money out of it. But actually the article is mine, so if you are interested in the paper I can send it to you. So, okay, good luck with your careers and looking forward also to the discussion.
Thank you, sir, for the informative session on port management. The audience greatly appreciated the numerous examples you shared and found your presentation to be highly informative. Your expertise has left a significant impact on our understanding of this complex subject matter. Let us again give a big round of applause to Mr. Maurice Jansen. is now time to listen to the second speaker of the session, Dr. Albert Weenstra. He is a professor in international trade and logistics at Rotterdam School of Management and senior program manager at UPT BV Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He is a former scientific director of TKI Dynalog, a Dutch logistics research financier. His expertise include international transport, global logistics, shipping economics, and international trade and customs. He is the academic director of MSc programs in maritime economics and logistics and customs and supply chain compliance, and conducts research in global logistics, customs supervision, and shipping economics. Now I invite Professor Albert Weenstra to share his insight on trends in supply chain management in a post-pandemic world. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very nice to be here and to see all of you here. Let's say the flower of the future of India, at least in the area of shipping and ports. Then I guess, yeah. So it's very nice to be able to talk to you. So this presentation, and so you've heard that I'm actually a maritime economist, right? So then I trained as an econometrician and then I became a maritime economist. So I'm very much at the start of my career was in shipping, and only ships, not so much ports. And from there on, I moved into shipping, international transportation, logistics, supply chain. So this is also why I'm now an academic director, not only of a program that's called Maritime Economics and Logistics, but also a program that's called Customs and Supply Chain Compliance. So I look at both these worlds, and it's also very much, I think, a reflection of the philosophy at Rotterdam School of Management, that you have to think about shipping and ports and logistics in the context of global supply chains. And I will explain it in a little bit what that means exactly. But you have to look at the context of why things happen to be able to make decisions about shipping, about buying the right ship or designing the right port. And you have to understand what kind of cargo are we looking at, where does the cargo come from, why does it need to go fast, or is it a lot of volume but low weight, and so these elements come from the supply chain perspective. So this is why I've always thought that the relationship between shipping, ports, and logistics and supply chain is a very fruitful one. So, oh yeah, I have to point here. Yeah. So I will try to do three things. I have to put my telephone here to make sure that I stick to the time. I have to talk to you a little bit quickly about supply chain management and logistics, just to make sure that you are on the same page. Then what I will do, this presentation is actually the result of a lot of discussions we had in Erasmus University with colleagues, but also with business, who said, we had a strange period. COVID was a strange period, not only for you and me, but also for shipping. We saw huge rate increases, we saw huge congestion, we saw all kinds of problems, shipping companies making enormous amounts of profits. What happened? And what's happening now? Now we don't have COVID anymore. What will happen to shipping? So I will say a few things about that, and I will also try to underline what I just said, which is that you have to, if you want to understand this properly, it's not just enough to look at the profits of shipping companies or at the prices of freight rates, but you also have to look at the supply chain perspective. And I think that will show that some of the repercussions of what happened during COVID in shipping can still be seen today and will be present for quite some time. Maybe I should keep it in my left arm. Oh. Yeah. Okay, so the way we explain to our students the relationship between transportation, logistics, and supply chain is with this little diagram, which has three levels. The top level responds to the supply chain, the middle one is logistics, and the bottom one, where you recognize trucks and boats and stuff, is the transport level. And the way we usually talk about this is that we say, okay, if you have a company, and your company manufactures something, the first thing you think about is what kind of product do I actually want to make? How do I make it? Where do I make it in the world? Do I produce it in China or in the Philippines or in Indonesia or in India? Where do the inputs come from? And where are the markets that I want to serve? Are these markets also in India or in Indonesia, or are the markets in the US and in Europe? And if you have done all those questions and given yourself answers, then you have created the supply chain. You say, well, I will do the manufacturing here, and then I will serve markets over there, and I will use a network of suppliers which are spread around Asia, and that all results in logistical problems, right? You have solved your problem. You know your product, you know your markets, you know your cost structure probably, you know your manufacturing plan, but you still have lots of logistics problems because you have to get inputs from one place in the world to another place, and you have to get your final products from where you manufacture it to your customers. That is logistics, right? As soon as you know what to do, you're working on logistics problems. So you're starting to think about, is it a lot? Is it a lot of volume? Is it a lot of weight? Does it need to go fast? Does it need to go slow? Do I need shipping? Do I need ports? What would be better ports? Do I need specific facilities in ports like cooling or freezing or specific handling, electricity plugs for containers, whatever? All that is logistics. And if you make those decisions, then you have transport problems left. You say, okay, now I know that it has to go from this port to that port. Let's choose a proper shipping line, and let's choose the proper type of ship. Let's think about how I move stuff from a port into the hinterland, into my warehouse. Is there a river so I can use barging, or do I need a road because I use trucking? So there is a hierarchy in these decisions, but I hope you understand that the decision making at these three levels is very different, right? In supply chain, it's all about product and about global footprint. In transportation, it's more about, okay, I need to move this stuff from A to B. So this is important to think about, because if we look at shipping, and also, by the way, if we look at customs, customs is a process that takes place at the transport level. If you cross a border physically, then a lot of requirements and compliance requirements are triggered. But the transport level, which is at the end of this scale of decision making, is obviously not the best environment to ask questions about the product, right? Which is what customs does. Customs says, what is this? Open it up. Let's look. What is on your document? Is that the same as what is in your truck? Right? These kinds of questions you shouldn't ask a truck driver, because he doesn't know. He has no clue what happened in decision making in terms of what product was moved and when and how and why there is so many boxes, and is it on pallets or not. This person doesn't know. So a lot of focus that we have, both the government side but also in our world of freight rate analysis and that stuff, is focused on the transport level. But to understand it properly, you have to know a little bit of the background. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first part, the relationship between transport and supply chain. The second part, because we're talking about COVID and we're talking about crisis, the way the business environment, the business world thinks about that is, okay, you cannot avoid a crisis, and what matters is how quickly you bounce back from a crisis, and this is called resilience. How resilient are you actually? This is a typical picture that has been used a lot in the discussions about resilience of business, which is a topic that has been in existence for quite some time. It also became important after 9/11 and long before that, but has been discussed a lot as a result of COVID, because in COVID we saw a lot of breaking down, right? We saw a lot of port closures, we saw a lot of factories closing because all the personnel was ill. We saw a lot of these sort of supply crises, demand crises, and then so this idea of, okay, but what does it mean bouncing back, and what is better? Should you actually not be in a crisis at all? Is that something is avoidable, or is it all about bouncing back quickly, right? Which is what this picture shows, more or less. And so it says you have different situations, different scenarios where, in fact, you can also control to some extent the negative impact of a crisis. But what really matters is how quick you bounce back, and the bouncing back should preferably bring you to a level of operation, a level of quality that is higher than where you were before. So this is where the discussion about shipping rates back at what they were before COVID is actually, you can understand this in the context of these kinds of pictures. Now, reliance is driven by a bunch of things, and I've listed them on the right. I will not discuss in a lot of detail, but they are about thinking about building in redundancy in the supply chain, in your logistics, thinking about diversity and creating different options that you could use, and one of them might be more affected by the crisis than the other. Thinking about modularity to control the impact of a crisis in a small part of the supply chain potentially. thinking about adaptability, think about prudence, and also about embeddedness of solutions, of understanding, embeddedness of people that understand what's going on. I will come back to this in a minute. That will help you understand very quickly where the crisis landed and how you can actually jump out of it. So, looking at resilience at the transport level, just some pictures of some stuff that was in the news. I think we have witnessed a perfect storm, because it was not only COVID. There was also COVID resulted in a number of things, but we've also witnessed the blockage of the Suez Canal, for instance, in exactly the wrong time, in the wrong place. And we've seen that the strategies of China of trying to ignore for quite a long time COVID and trying to clamp down on it quite fiercely with very small breakouts of COVID, closing down entire ports or entire cities, and that sort of behavior is also not helping very much in recovery, obviously. So, so we've had layers and layers and layers of these kinds of issues and consequences that have created quite a lot of hiccups. And the result, I think, one of the results was congestion in ports. So ships couldn't be handled in ports, so they were lining up, also lining up because of the ever-given blockage of the Suez Canal, by the way, but unprecedented congestion in ports, also in Western ports. And I think this is one of the reasons why we were engaged in a project out of which some of this material resulted, where the Port of Rotterdam, the logistics industry in the Netherlands asked us and a few other people to investigate why do we suddenly have so much congestion, and are we more sensitive to congestion as a result of COVID, or is it an underlying problem that we have ignored until now and that now has come to the surface maybe? Do we do a better job than some other ports? The answer is yes, we do a much better job in Rotterdam compared to, for instance, LA and Long Beach, as it turns out. But so congestion was a big issue. And the other one, obviously, was, and that has received a lot of press, freight rate developments. And so prices for containers, to move containers around the world, have increased tremendously in the COVID period. First maybe slowly, but afterwards we've seen increases of freight rates of by a factor 10, which is really unprecedented in the container shipping world, because their whole existence is all about providing a trade facilitating service for global trade, for manufactured products. So enormously unexpected freight rate increases doesn't really play a role in that narrative. But it happened in COVID. So, and I think the left picture shows you the freight rate developments. The right picture is more a picture where, this is from Drury, where the shipping consultant in London, where they try to understand a little bit which part of the shipping industry drives the freight rate increase, and you see this big block in the middle, which is containerized shipping, liner shipping, has been driving increases in the general freight rate levels across the industry. So, interestingly, and the freight rates have gone down as well. You can see that here in the picture. You see that it goes up enormously, it goes down. From a maritime economist, I don't know if you've all had maritime economics, by the way. From a maritime economics point of view, this is completely understandable, right? Because the short term, so I will talk in your language for a bit. The short term supply curve in shipping is hockey stick shaped, right? Which means that if you get a capacity problem, prices can go up to almost infinity, but they will also quickly come down again as soon as the capacity issues are resolved. So this price hike is not unexpected at all from a maritime economics perspective. What is surprising is that there apparently was an underlying capacity problem. So this did not come out of nowhere exactly. I will say a few things about that. It didn't really go away. So the prices went down, but this sensitivity has always been there because it's shipping and because we have short-term hockey stick supply curves. So it didn't really go away. It can happen again fairly quickly as soon as we get some sort of capacity issue again in shipping. And it requires, I think, so these two things, this was always there and it hasn't really gone away. Now we have normal prices again. is something I think that is the change as a result of COVID. So before COVID, we took shipping for granted. Many people took shipping for granted. It's always there. It brings the containers with all your cheap stuff that comes from China. That is a system that has been working properly for 40, 50 years. This system is a lot more sensitive than we think. It's a lot more vulnerable. It's not so robust. It's not so effective as a trade facilitator as we thought. There's lots of, I could give whole lectures about this, but this specific case of COVID shows this. It's sensitive to capacity constraints, and then prices will do very strange things. It's sensitive to capacity management in ports, and as a result, congestion can easily develop. So it is a sensitive system, a lot more sensitive than we thought. And that means that it requires a new view on how we organize international business that leans, that depends on shipping. I have to be patient. Yes, there we go. Okay, so let me have to be careful here because we could go on for hours and hours. But and to understand a little bit about industry structure in shipping, especially liner shipping, so regular fixed departure type of shipping, and we have for containers specifically. This has been around for more than a century. Right? It's sort of when steam turbines replaced, or steam engines replaced the sails, we got the possibility to have reliable sailings, reliable durations of shipping, and a fixed system of scheduled departures came up. That was also very quickly challenged by tramp shipping, by parties that said, okay, that's nice. I see that all the cargo is lining up on the quays in Asia and India that is paying well on the Sunday. So what I will do is I will show up on Monday, pick up all this interesting cargo, and then the liner shipping guys who offer services on the Tuesday and the Wednesday and the Thursday and the Friday, nothing left for them, only the poorly paying cargo. So very quickly these people figured this out and arranged, 100 years ago, arranged solutions for this. And they said you have to regulate or allow us to regulate ourselves to some extent. And this became the so-called conference system, and that's been around also for about a century, since the beginning of the 20th century. In Europe, this has been institutionalized first in a system that allowed the conferences to exist, and conferences were like cartels, mechanisms that were allowed to set prices together. That was institutionalized formally in Europe in 1986 and was only disbanded in 2003, so not 20 years ago. And that was replaced by something that's called the block exemption regulation for line consortia, which doesn't allow price fixing anymore, but it still allows cooperation. And it still allows the liner shipping companies to sit together, to pool their capacity, and to serve routes together, and to organize the planning and scheduling of ships jointly. So, and this is a regulation that is up for renewal in 2024. And so interestingly there we have a lot of discussions with regulators, with policymakers in the Netherlands, for instance, who have to contribute to this debate that's going on in Europe about should we extend it again? Is the liner shipping industry still the industry that requires this kind of antitrust exemption? And it's an exemption because in general we don't allow any antitrust infringements in Europe. That's in the basic law, the sort of hard-coded in the starting point of the whole European Union is free competition. So an antitrust exemption is a very particular thing. And the interesting thing is that the main issue here is that until now the liner shipping industry has always said we offer reliable services, frequent services, a very reasonable price, and we play an important role as a trade facilitator. That is the standard narrative that they've always had for a century. Now this story people don't believe this story anymore, right? Because they didn't have reasonable prices. They had prices that went up by a factor 10. In fact, if you look at some of the other components, frequent services, reliable services, those elements also are not valid anymore. I will show you a few examples. So the liner shipping is in a big problem, is in big trouble in Europe at the moment. Their narrative is not acceptable anymore. And I think the result of this is that this debate has been raging on, that we expected a decision on the renewal in the beginning of this year. Decision has been postponed. We don't have any sort of idea where this is going at the moment, so I think there's a very good chance that it will not be renewed and that we will get rid of this antitrust exemption, and that is a very particular effect of the whole sort of COVID experience that we've had. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I show you on the right, this freight rate hike, even though it's an understandable shipping economics mechanism, as I already told you, that is one of the main reasons, and that is a very visible way, and it was discussed not just in the maritime press, in Lloyd's List, but also in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, and all over the place. So it's something that everybody knows, and that everybody is using to sort of slap the shipping companies around and say, you with your nice story, it's not true. Look, this is what your freight rate did in the last 2 years. So, but another problem is this one. Is at the shipping industry, you could say until now, you take the shipping industry as a very sort of secondary party. They just have ships and they sail the ships as best as they can. And what could they have done something? Well, as it turns out, in COVID, they did something, and it was exactly the wrong thing. Let me explain. So, what happened in COVID? Everybody had to stay at home, right? And in some parts of the world, this was promoted very, for instance, in the US. It's supported financially by the government. They handed out stimulus checks to everybody, and everybody used these stimulus checks to buy headsets and phones and laptops and screens and desk chairs and all kinds of stuff that you need to do your work at home, which was a lot more than what normally was being shipped. So it was actually created a demand surge in the world, this type of behavior. Also, even if in the Netherlands we didn't have stimulus checks, but we also had facilities by all our employers say, look, I have to work at home now, but my chair is not good. Can I buy another chair? Sure, buy another chair. So a huge demand surge as a result of COVID, unexpected consumer buying behavior, as I say here, and also additional demand for eventually shipping personal protective equipment around, shipping lots of medical equipment around, shipping vaccines around. So it created the demand surge. Now, the shipping industry, they had a crisis 10 years ago, the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. This was also a demand crisis, but the other way around, as it turns out. What they found out is that the way they can very effectively deal with a crisis is by reducing capacity. That is what the shipping industry can do. It's not so easy to increase capacity because you have to go to a shipyard. Building a ship takes a few years, but you can reduce capacity effectively. You can sail slower, you can take ships out of commission, and you can skip ports. So you can do a lot in reducing transport capacity. So this is what they learned 10 years ago. This is also a mechanism they use on a frequent basis, looking at this picture. So even before COVID in 2019, in some parts of the year, blank sailings, so taking ships out of commission because of low demand, was a practice that they were doing regularly, and this practice increased tremendously under COVID, because the shipping industry, simpletons as they are sometimes, thought, oh, crisis, probably low demand, let's reduce capacity. But here, where is it? Here. Don't touch it. Oh, now we go too far. This was demand surge, right? Not lower demand increased. So it was, reducing capacity in a situation where demand increases, it is a bit sensitive, this thing, is exactly the wrong response. Exactly the wrong response, right? In fact, they created, to some extent, their own capacity shortage. So it's not surprising that the freight rates went up like crazy. Right? Because not only was there a shortage of capacity, and there was a lot of demand for capacity that maybe normally wouldn't be there, they also created a capacity shortage in the shipping industry, especially in container shipping. So they caused, to some extent, their own problem. Yeah, let's see. Yeah. So, and there is another effect. So as soon as you look at the relationship between transportation and logistics, you also have to consider the ordering behavior of companies. And this ordering behavior deals in a certain way, I hope maybe some of you know from your logistics courses, the way to deal with uncertainty, with variability, is by building in slack, by over-ordering, by keeping stocks, by pushing more, generally, pushing more product into the pipeline. That is what companies do if they are confronted with uncertainty. And this is what they did. So it's not so easy to find pictures that show this, but there's some of this, you see on the left inventories of US retailers and manufacturers. So you see that the manufacturers' stock inventories went up quite considerably. On the right you see a whole bunch of various inventory measures that the US has, and you see also that these started to sort of wildly fluctuate. So this is a typical response that we've seen all across all the S&P 500, the large companies that have a global footprint. All of them started to stock up products and started to order products. The fact that they were confronted with shipping companies that didn't want to take their orders only drove them to push in more orders, start calling more shipping companies, start looking for more containers to move their products around. And because not having product is a bigger issue than paying a lot of transportation fees. So, and we have retailers in the Netherlands that in this period ordered twice as much goods than what they would normally sell on a yearly basis. Twice as much. And it didn't come immediately, but it's coming now, right? Because it's coming delayed, so that led to a short-term congestion issue in, let's say, 2021, 2022. And it's still, we have places in the Netherlands where they are just trying to get rid of containers with retail goods from the Lidl and the Aldi and all these kinds of companies who ordered way too many goods from China. So that's another issue. And this is an issue, so the shipping industry is bouncing back fairly quickly. This issue of pushing too much product into the pipeline, ramping up production in China or in other places, that will take a much longer time to get rid of. So suddenly, in the popular press, so the bullwhip effect is typically the description of this process. Suddenly, lots of newspapers and other media started mentioning this issue of the bullwhip effect, and as a result of the supply chain pandemic. And the interesting thing is, so scientific papers like how does this work, this bullwhip effect and the ripple effect we've seen. The funny thing is that the literature, if you read it well, the Hao Li introduction of bullwhip effect, it talks about, okay, there is this possible bullwhip effect. It's a result of not communicating well in the supply chain and dealing with uncertainty. You should avoid it at all costs, and the way to do that would be to equalize information sharing across the entire supply chain, right? So the message from the academic world is try to avoid this problem. We couldn't, right? We have it now. So, but there the literature doesn't really say much about how do you deal with an ongoing bullwhip problem. How do you get rid of the bullwhip? Nobody knows. And I've spoken to a whole bunch of my colleagues because as in the COVID period, I was director of a research institute, so we're funding a lot of research in this area. And all my science supply chain colleagues said, well, I think we just have to wait. Yeah, is that your scientific opinion? We have to wait? I got a bit aggressive when I spoke to these guys, but yeah, anyway. Let me skip in terms of time these things. We have interesting talks about logistics of vaccines, but I will not bore you with that. So where are we now? Port congestion, that was happening in 2001, 2021, 22 is gone for now. But as I already said, the underlying uncertainty and vulnerability, I think, is still there. We still have global transportation uncertainty, and the result of that is a much more long-term process of not only the COVID congestion and some mess-ups in the Suez Canal, but the drive towards bigger and bigger and bigger container vessels that have resulted in condensing services. And this is something that is how you say, published quite regularly or analyzed quite regularly in a document like the Review of Maritime Transport from UNCTAD. We are slowly seeing the stock and sales misalignment being resolved, but it will take some time, considerable amount of time. And I think the result out of this from a maritime economist perspective is we need to understand a lot better what shipping companies do with ship size. So I will spend a little bit of time, the remaining time I have, on that. But very, very quickly. So we've seen in liner shipping that we have had 3 decades or so of looking for the right size of ship, the optimal size of ship. This is driven by economies of scale, obviously, and particular cost structure in shipping. But this is now, I think, we are witnessing at the moment, also to some extent due to COVID, people have started to realize this, even though they may have realized this 5 years ago already, that this is a problem, these big ships. Because big ships bring a lot of containers, and a lot of containers clog up the hinterland transport systems. And this is also still happening in Rotterdam, but in a very particular way. So I will just quickly, I will not be able to show you a lot of the details, but what we did as a result of this analysis is we looked at, we sat down with a port consultant in the Netherlands who is doing a lot of simulation work called TBA, Portwise, as they changed their name. And we made a simulation study where we looked at terminal operations with a regular, let's say, set of ships. In the Netherlands we have quite a varied sort of range of ships that come at container terms, because we have the really big container vessels, but we also have feeder vessels, and we have small barges which maybe have a capacity of 200-300 TEUs, and all of these use the same infrastructure. So we looked at a mess of, or a combination of these vessels, and then we looked at the performance of the terminal, and then we started to gradually introduce bigger and bigger ships. So that's sort of the simulation experiment. And it uses a scheduling approach like this and a fairly abstracted terminal operation simulation. And then, so I will not go through all the detail here, but what it shows is that one insight that we found a bit surprising is that actually both shipping companies and terminals like to handle big ships because it's easier, right? To handle a few big ships is way easier, way more efficient, way more nice to do in terms of operations that handle a lot of small ships. So that's one reason. So actually introducing bigger ships, the shipping lines and the terminals are not going to complain immediately. What it does result in is peaks in almost all the sub-elements of a terminal. It peaks in the key cranes, peak in the stack, peaks in the hinterland gates. It results in peaks. And to some extent, if you give priority to big ships, which is what we do in Europe, if you give priority to them, actually we have situations where the quay is cleared and small ships are pushed away to handle a bigger ship. That obviously means that the smaller ships are impacted by this sort of behavior of dealing with big ships. And that is reflected in the rest of the study. So we looked at crane performance, we looked at increasing dwell times, especially we looked at the last two, which are particular for Rotterdam, the quality of ETA data, which is extremely poor in all over the world, I think, but also in Rotterdam. So we looked at what if you don't know for certain if a big ship is coming and you're keeping a key free because you thought the ship was coming today, it's actually coming tomorrow. What is the impact of that? And a particular issue that we have in Rotterdam is that these 24,000 TEU ships can actually not go anywhere else than in Rotterdam, fully laden, which means they go to Rotterdam, they get rid of a bunch of containers, usually 3,000-4,000. Then they sail to Antwerp, Hamburg, Bremen, Felixstowe, and then come back to Rotterdam and load up fully as much as they can and sail back to Asia. So these two split calls is something that creates enormous reduction of performance in the terminal, because in a full call you can integrate the loading and unloading process in a very efficient and effective way, and that also gives you optimal use of all the equipment in the terminal. If you only have an unloading call, you lose that efficiency. So the Port of Rotterdam, especially terminals like ECT, are complaining a lot internally to us that this is happening, but nobody is really listening, because the Port of Rotterdam wants to be the port where you can go with your 24,000 TEU vessels. And they know, and they're actually proud that these vessels can not go anywhere else. They gave them 50% reduction of the harbor dues for the second call. So there is a completely messed up system of how we deal with these 24,000 TEUs, and what this simulation shows is that it creates inefficiencies, which contribute to congestion, right? To the vulnerability of congestion, at least. Right, so let me get through this. I had some, but as you see, I'm a professor, so if you invite a professor, I can talk for 3 hours. So, in the conclusions of this, large call sizes have positive and negative impacts. ETA uncertainty and split calls, not necessarily a good thing. And the impacts extend especially, and this is an insight that was quite interesting for the ecosystem in Rotterdam, the impacts of handling big ships and giving priority to big ships extend to other parties in the network. In particular, in our study, to barges and feeders, and also to truck companies who have to deal with the peaks and the gates. So this, let me say, turns around the discussion a little bit about nice these big ships and look at another big record to a more discussion that I think Maurice was talking about, which is, do we really want this, right? Is this something that we should continue to support in the Port of Rotterdam? Is this something that should we discourage or at least not encourage these kinds of ships in the Port of Rotterdam? Because they not only create negative impacts on almost everybody else. Right, so let me finish. So I hope I've convinced you a little bit when I was talking about this, that the global transport system, which is embedded in global logistics and supply chain systems, is much more vulnerable than we thought, and less in control, much less in control as they try to make you believe. It is resilient, and the shipping industry bounced back, the rates are at normal levels again, the empty container availability is reduced. But it doesn't mean, because there are a number of much more long-term underlying trends, it doesn't mean that congestion cannot happen again. It can happen very easily, as a matter of fact. Just a combination of a work stoppage in Hamburg and a storm will already create issues in the Port of Rotterdam. And global businesses have had very little awareness of this with the impact of their global footprint. So some companies at least are reconsidering this. And we are trying to keep this discussion alive to say, look, guys, this happened. This showed an underlying vulnerability that you weren't aware of. Try to think about this when you start thinking about your global footprint, about your global supply chain decision making. And you see a lot of companies doing this. Apple is trying to reduce their dependencies on China. Lots of other companies are looking for alternatives. In Europe, we have an active policy to create a lot of manufacturing industry that we lost, you could say, to India and to China and pharmaceuticals, for instance, but also in chips. So I think some businesses are doing this already, and it will probably result in a rearrangement of activities around the world. In that sense, COVID was a special period, but also has sparked a lot of this, I think, heightened understanding of the international business systems. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the seminar.
Thank you so much, sir, for graciously enlightening us on the and published research articles in many reputed national and international journals. He has also conducted numerous training programs for port executives. May I now invite Dr. M. Shekhar to share his insights on Maritime India Vision 2030. Over to you, sir.
Thank you.
Very distinguished director of Chennai campus, Rear Admiral Amit Dosti, Mr. Maurice Johnson of Erasmus, Professor Albert Wainstra from Erasmus, my head of the department, Dr. B. Swaminathan, former CEO of Adani, Mr. N.R.S. Karanesan, and Mr. Balasubramaniam, the maritime lawyer and the former IIDFC director. My other members of the faculty, dignitaries of the dais, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear friends, good afternoon to one and all. It is a great pleasure and honor that I am standing before you, and I will be talking another 20 to 25 minutes about Maritime India Vision 2030. And why should I talk about Maritime India Vision 2030? What is the necessity of it? India has a very long maritime history. When you talk about maritime history, it dates back from 9th century. Picked up some literature review from the Chola and Pandya dynasty, which were pioneers in making shipbuilding exclusively for transportation. Probably a Dow construction company at that time. And now this maritime is very important for India and for economic growth. Why? 95% of the cargo is moved through maritime transportation in terms of volume, and 65% in terms of value is also transported to maritime. Hence it is important. And we have a very long coastline of around 7,500 odd kilometers from Kandla to Kolkata, K2K, we can call it as K2K. And around 1,500 million metric ton is being transported through maritime and 1/10 of it through national waterways. And catering to 20 lakh employment, and we are aiming for 20,000 crores of revenue, an employability of 20 lakhs. And hence maritime requires attention now. And if there is a growth in maritime, if there is a growth in maritime transportation, definitely there will be a growth in economy, which will lead to increase in GDP, decrease in inflation, and decrease in fiscal deficit. And that's why maritime is required right now, and we have to talk on it. And Maritime India Vision document is a document that's been rolled out by Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways exclusively to accelerate maritime economic growth. Yeah, so this is what this Maritime India Vision 2030. This document is prepared by Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways under the Government of India. Why this document is required? Because we have to popularize among the maritime fraternity, and they have a vision of how Indian maritime would be in next decade. In 2030, what will be the vision? So when we want to put the vision into practice and when we want to implement, it is required at every stage that we have to popularize this visionary document among maritime fraternity so that they can acclimatize with this and help, because they're all stakeholders. Any maritime, you take a shipboard or you take inland waterways or you take charters, you take steamboats, you take inland waterways or freight forwarding company, all these are stakeholders, and they have to know what is the vision document is all about. And when we are trying to implement that, it becomes easy and comfort for us to implement. And so it has to be popularized among the maritime fraternity. This MIV 2030, they have identified around 150 initiatives where which they can able to completely overhaul the entire system of maritime. And this has been a very comprehensive document. One of the best brains in India have come together and have prepared this document. In next 20 to 25 minutes, I will be deliberating on this MIV 2030 document. And this has around 10 chapters, starting from infrastructure, port infrastructure, the first one, and the 10th chapter, which is very close to my heart, is about maritime training, education and research. But I will be deliberating on the 9th chapter, which is about decarbonization, right? And this 9th chapter, decarbonization, has around 8 initiatives, which Government of India has said that once when we implement or once when we put into practice, there will be a lot of growth in maritime. Yeah, so this is the 9th chapter, lead the world in safe, sustainable and green maritime sector. I have collected some information, let me just run through this information. These initiatives particularly focus on operational efficiency, improvement, post-driven industrialization and creating safe and sustainable world-class port to address the growing trade volume, which has to reduce logistics costs through better evacuation and cost effectiveness process. That's one of the key ideas. See, the logistics cost in India is around 14 to 15% of the GDP. And what is the aim? The aim is we have to reduce the logistics cost from 14% to 7.5% of the GDP sooner or later. That is one of the main issues. That is one of the main things that once when there is a foreign direct investment or FDP keep coming in India, the main thing the investors ask is how much is the logistics cost. We have to bring down the logistics cost very drastically. And these initiatives, which one by one I could able to tell you, uh, so these are the areas of focus: increasing renewable energy usage at ports, improving air quality at ports, optimizing water usage and increasing green cover, improving solid waste management, dredging material recycling, zero accidents at ports, injuries or health hazards at ports, centralizing monitoring of key port indicators, key performance indicators, and compliance to the global standards. These are all the areas which I will deliberate in next 20 minutes. First, let me talk on renewable energy adoption at ports. And what is renewable energy? See, the problem is we are emitting a lot of fossil fuel. How to reduce the carbon footprint in India? The major thing is in ports. I don't know how many of you have seen the ports. How many of you have seen the ports? Probably my MBA students would have seen. How many of you have seen the ports? Yeah. See, you should be knowing. Ports is normally classified in India as major and non-major ports, and major ports is under the government control, under the central government control, and non-major ports is with the state government as well as private sector, right? And this 12 major ports, technically speaking, major ports are that covered under the Major Ports Authorities Act. Since we have a Kamarajar port which covers under the Corporate Act, let me not technically explain that. So major ports, our definition could be redrafted like this: major ports are the ports that are guided under or that are under Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways. And now, what is more important is the amount of fossil fuel these ports used to spend in ports is very high, and the greenhouse gas emission is so high. And what we want to do it in MIB 2030 is adopting this renewable energy. First one is solar and wind energy. Solar is abundant, right? So this solar energy, which has to access land, rooftops at calm waters, or usage at rooftops at office, shallow port waters, and so on. And wind energy is where the ports can adopt, evaluating both onshore and offshore wind farms, conventional wind turbines in shallow waters, identifying feasible areas for onshore wind farms across port land, set up windmills under PPP, and leverage offshore wind farms potentially at southern tip of the Indian peninsula. This is what, see, installing the solar energy and wind power is very difficult because it's highly capital intensive, and how to mitigate that capital intensity also there is a separate formula and policy which has been charted. You can work under public-private partnership where Government of India can tie up with the private party on a very long-term basis, at least for 30 years. Not right now we are doing PPP projects in port, and they can help us in depositing or investing capital into the wind farm or solar panels, and we can derive the benefit out of it for a small share of cost that we can pay to the companies which are investing in the solar panel and wind turbine. See, if you go to the port, any port you go, there is a huge wind. Either you go to the outer harbor or to the inner harbor, you have a huge wind, and there is a solar which is very, very free. And how to harness that? How to harness the sunlight? How to harness the wind is a matter to ponder. Only thing, the capital cost is more. So Government of India is trying to talk to all the PPP concessionaires to install solar and wind energy sooner or later around 2030, so that we can have a clean power, clean energy. No producing electricity through thermal station, which is once again emitting fossil fuel. So we want to limit that. There are some advanced solutions: tidal energy, solar thermal energy, and wave energy. Tidal energy, where you can produce electricity through tidal energy, but it's very expensive. The Government of India has tried to plan around 7,000 megawatt in Gulf of Cambay. I'm just talking about the data, what is required and what they have planned. 7,000 megawatts in the Gulf of Cambay in Gujarat, 1,200 megawatts in the Gulf of Kutch in Gujarat, around 1,100 megawatt in the Gangetic deltas and Sundarban regions of West Bengal and Park Bay Mannar channel, around 1,250 megawatts, just to harness tidal energy, which can be explored as a pilot project. Of course, there's a pilot project is going on in Gujarat, and we're working on that. But only problem is highly capital intensive. So is the case of solar thermal energy. So solar thermal energy power system, which concentrates, it's about a solar radiation as high temperature energy source to produce electricity using thermal route. So technologies which are appropriate for application where direct solar radiation is high. And so is the case of wave energy, and Government of India is trying to plan to increase the wave energy or electricity which can be produced through wave energy. And what are the initiatives? These are the initiatives taken by government to increase the share of renewable energy to 60% across major ports, and a pilot advanced energy solution at select ports after detailed feasibility study. It's on the pilot of green improvement and wave energy at Cochin Port is in progress. I'm going to talk about air quality management. We'll talk about air quality improvement. See, this is where the problem is in any port. Any port you go, the air quality is so bad. Why? Because we handle dusty cargoes like coal, pet coke, thermal coal, steam coal, iron ore, iron pellets, muriate of potash, sulfur, right? Clinkers. These are highly dangerous cargo, highly dusty cargo. Whether I'm unloading it or when I'm hatch feeding it, the difficulty is how to handle it without a dust. So air quality in ports are really, it's completely messy. So how do you improve it? How do you improve the air quality improvement? It's possible. It's about clean fuels to reduce, there are clean fuels which we have said, clean fuels to reduce vehicle emission at ports is one of the initiatives. So to drive multi-clean fuel like electric, CNG, LNG for vehicle in port ecosystem. See, when the vessel is getting berthed, as I think Morris has referred that, when the vehicle, when the vessel is berthed at the berth, we always try to burn the fossil fuel and run the generator on the vessel. And what we talk about and what is normally said is we can use a shore-based electricity. But when you talk about shore-based electricity, when you produce electricity through thermal power station, then it's once again you are burning a fossil fuel. There is no saving of fossil fuel or minimizing the carbon footprint. So people are talking about solar energy, people are talking about tidal energy and wind energy so that you have a clean fuel and you don't pollute the port. Another major factor to reduce air emission in port is performance of the port. Because performance of the port, how it can contribute to the air quality improvement. Suppose your dwell time is less, right? And your turnaround time is less in a vessel, where you perform much better. Instead of 18 shift, when I can able to hatch feed the cargo in 16 shift. And where I can discharge the cargo in 13 shift, I can able to discharge it with 10 shift. Probably that will reduce your air pollution because your finishing, your performance is much more better. And trucks should not be plied on the wharf. I'm talking about the diesel trucks. Automated guided vehicle is one solution where we can solve this carbon footprint. Or we can operate by electric battery. Probably the power from the electric truck is little less in electricity, but when we come out with some sort of solution where the electrical truck is operated, the torque is much more better. When you talk about the truck, the torque should be there. When we have an electric batteries which can able to push the torque on a larger thing, and when we can bring electric trucks to hatch feed and hatch clear, or even the container for that matter, most of the container terminal in India are being supported only by trucking. Very few ports have a support of rail freight. Or when you can able to operate most all the container terminal to rail freight, that's okay. And it has to be, the haulage and profiling should be done only through a electrical loco, not through a diesel loco. Then you find this air quality improvement could definitely be assured. So how do you reduce it? Tugboat, coastal vessels, extreme trade vessels, these are all we can able to see that electrified, it could be an electricity based shore supply can be given to these vessels so that you can see this air quality is improved in ports. Handling dangerous cargo also will definitely decrease the air quality, and there will be a pollution inside the port. When I handle like linear alkaline, benzene or D-stuff, lab epichlorohydrin, when I stuff epichlorohydrin into the containers, or caustic soda, or when I import sulfur through bulk cargo, right? Or when I import muriate of potash or fertilizer in bulk, or using stuffing caustic soda or epichlorohydrin into the container. This is all dangerous, which will pollute. Naturally, your air quality will come down. So what precaution you take? There are some initiatives which Government of India has said to minimize that. IMDG has to be followed very strictly. Compliance should be very strict because that's what is required. Morris has said that like this profit, then profit will have an impact on the society, or society on biosphere to society, society to profit. No? That's how the layer is. So people should talk more on environment, because when you imagine a port or any country which has completely, there is a carbon, there is a fossil fuel, and everywhere there is a high pollution, how long people will live? Maybe 20, 25 years. Even today, when you take a research, when you take a study, people who work in iron ore terminal, the engineers and the operators who work in iron ore terminal, the maximum time life is not more than 54, 55. Most of the compassionate appointment in ports, in major ports, is because of this people who work in iron ore terminal. Pollution is so high, your lungs get affected. People who work in this dangerous cargo industry, without neutralizing it, especially corrosive elements like linear alkaline, benzene and epichlorohydrin, these are all raw material for detergents and you have to use it, right? So such things, probably it has to be handled properly, or it has to be handled as per the compliance with all these safety equipments and gadgets. Then probably that dangerous things can come down and your air quality also can be improved considerably. Air equipment electrification, right? You should not know using diesel engines. No diesel locos are used inside the port, only electrical locos. No diesel cranes, only electrical crane. No EFLTs are used. Automated guided vehicles are used. No trucks plying on the wharf and transit ships. Right? Everything is electrified, and this electricity should come from solar necessarily, or from wind energy, right? Then there will be a considerable improvement in air quality. So I always add performance to the port also as one of the major indicator to minimize the carbon emission, right? Because you keep, let the vessel be in the berth instead of loading at 10 shift and you are loading it 14 to 15 shift, or late reporting of gang. Naturally you are burning the fossil fuel. Late reporting of pilot launch, late reporting of tugboats. So all this will add some more furor to the air quality. And where is the question of air quality improvement? First is performance. It has to be, we have to perform in such a way that, so that you minimize the operational time in the berth. And the berth productivity should go up. Once when the berth productivity goes up, automatically everything will fall in place. This initiative I forgot. So electrification program for material handling equipment across all ports. So this is an initiative and people are working on it. LNG bunkering. So this LNG bunkering is one where this natural gas could be used instead of using fossil fuel, instead of using diesel. Wherever possible, this LNG can be used, and there is an initiative LNG and this Marmagora port, I have collected the data. So what they have done is, in major port, they have installed something called a continuous ambient air quality monitoring system, right? So they are working on it. IOCL has taken several proactive steps to ensure availability of this 0.5% sulfur compliant fuels, and aims to supply more than 1 metric ton per year of LNG from its Haldia and Gujarat refinery for international domestic bunkering. This is the data I have collected. So their work is in progress, right? So the IOCL has come forward to help us out to implement this MIV 2030 initiative. Yeah. So dust emission management, that's what I said. So dust is one thing, it's very difficult to manage dust inside the port, but that is possible with the help of the stakeholders, with the help of the employees. It could be, we could able to curtail. Any ports for that matter, I'm just talking about Indian ports, you will have a huge dust, and the air quality is very less. So how do you do that? That's what I said. Major ports now, they have installed a continuous ambient air quality monitoring system, which I told you. This has helped to reduce the air quality, increase the air quality and reduce the dust emission. And the ports which have come forward is Paradip and Marmagora ports are operating on an automatic emission monitoring system. So they want to find out, and they are given a good feedback that this is working out well. And minimizing the usage of coal in producing electricity. This is one of the initiatives taken by the government. So where we have to use a clean fuel to help us out, to come out of it. Anyway, the initiative is to increase usage of efficiency enhancement techniques such as ship tracking, smart lighting at ports, move towards CO2, and to develop and issue guidelines on dust management to drive ports to adopt modern practices in a phase-wise manner. Continual training on this, how to improve how to improve the air quality and minimize the dust and dust emission. Dust emission management programs can be continuously be initiated by the port, so that can work out to a very larger extent. Optimizing water usage. Water is free, but how long is water could be free? You will not be surprised water could be traded in the commodity market. Right? You will find water in stock exchange. People will bid for it, and there could be derivatives which will work aligned to the water. I'm just talking about potable water. Possibility is there in near future if the water usage is not optimized. So water usage optimizations. So initiative have been rolled out by the Ministry of Port, Waterways and Port Shipping and Waterways. And what are the activities in water usage optimization? What are the activities of water? Water sprinkling over dusty cargo, firefighting, green belt, gardening, ballasting, and for others. So reusable, water could be reusable, right, by reverse process of osmosis. Sewage treatment plant. So when we start reusing it, then we could able to, that could be one of the solution, not the only solution. So that's one major thing. And seawater recycling is also one thing, where in which we can use it. And so we can minimize the water optimization, though it is free. It cannot be free for a long time. Maybe after 100, 150 years, can we have water? So it could be a very rare commodity. There is a possibility, because what is required, see, all this is all required because we should have a sustainable growth. We should have a very positive growth in the economy. As I keep discussing in the classrooms, when iPhones and Apple are costing only 2,000 rupees or 1,500 rupees, right? Say around $25, right? Apple and iPhones are $25, right? So you get one of the best gadgets for 2,000 and 2,500 rupees. You are very happy because your laptops and desktops are only 2,000, 3,000. Only problem is 1 kg of tomato will be 15,000 rupees, and 1 kg of rice will be 8,000, and 1 kg of wheat is 3,000. What sort of a growth is that? What sort of a development is that? Somewhere we have missed. So when we want to work, this could happen after 100, 150 years when we do not talk about environment or biosphere. It is the right time we have to rise and see that this environmental impact is less. So water is one thing which has to be used, optimized. We have to optimize the use the water. So build infrastructure, this initiative, build infrastructure, sewage treatment plant and employ water conservation techniques at select ports by deploying atomizer, risk channels on pilot basis and expand to other ports. See, once we go to the port, see, we have to sprinkle the water on the dusty cargo. You will never find any water is getting sprinkled. They will splash water on the dusty cargo. That becomes another problem. Is it not? You are wasting water and also the purpose also not solved. So we have to take it very seriously on that. Then Green Belt Initiative. So the rationale behind it, it supports biological diversity and maintains pleasant microclimate in the region, retention of soil moisture, erosion control and coastal protection, recharge of groundwater, absorbs pollutants from environment and helps in effective pollution control like atmospheric CO2 sequestration. So Green Belt is also one of the important aspects in MIV 2030, and the initiative is to develop Green Belt including mangrove grove, cover at ports with participation corporates under CSR programs. So corporate social responsibility program, 5% of your revenue, I think we have to give it for CSR. We can draw this corporates to invest in this Green Belt initiative. That will work out wonders, and it could definitely, I promise that it will minimize the carbon footprint in ports. So green shipping. So green shipping is one thing. We will talk about, there are a lot of initiative government of India has taken. We call that a Swachh Bharat portal to facilitate port reception facility. Ratifying, this is all which has been done in MIV 2030, I am just reading it out. The Swachh Sagar portal to facilitate port reception facilities, ratifying Hong Kong Convention. This Hong Kong Convention, most of the maritime students should be knowing, it's about shipbuilding and ship breaking and recycling, and what precaution we take in minimizing the carbon footprint. Single-use plastic ban, that's one thing which is very important. So how far we use this plastic, because without plastic it's very difficult to pull on the life today, but it is possible. Anything plastic is really carbon emission, greenhouse gas emission, and carbon footprint is there. So how do you reduce this plastic usage? So use only high density polyethylene, right? Using a low density polyethylene with less than 20 microns where you cannot reuse and you can't dispose it off. So avoid that. So government can ban that, can use penalty, can, suppose people are using high density polyethylene, you are milk sachets for high density polyethylene. Minimize the PET bottles. Polyethylene terminal is also dangerous one. So polyethylene terminal, using bottles with polyethylene terminal or so these things can be minimized. Polypropylene is okay, you want your buckets on there. No? Polypropylene is okay to a very larger extent, but using this, even plastic spoons are very dangerous, right? And now people have come out with an innovative idea. There is no plastic spoon. You have a spoon with a millet. You know, millet what you eat. They have made spoon in that. So you eat your food with that millet spoon and take millet spoon also. You can consume it. Possible. Instead of using plastic spoon, use millet spoon or any spoon which of that nature where it is eatable, right? Eat the food, take the spoon also. Possibilities there. Because this can minimize the usage of plastic. So that will give that's what we talk about circular economy, right? I think very popular nowadays. We are talking about circular economy, right? So the residue of one will be a raw material for you have to recycle the raw materials which are using, right? There is nothing called, nothing will go waste. There is nothing called going waste. So people are talking about this, especially on polythene, this plastic granules. These plastic granules are used for these jackets and for roads also, making this tar road, use plastic granules. I'm talking about the low density polyethylene plastic granules. So that is one way to how to beat the system. That's one way to beat the system. So single-use plastic ban portal for facilitating requirement of SUPR, risk assessment of Indian coast move towards ratification of ballast water convention, mandatory submission of fuel oil consumption irrespective of gross tonnage. So fuel oil consumption, right? Mandatory submission of this in the port, right, to the deputy port conservator, and towards the shore supply. So these are all some of the initiatives taken in green shipping and to drive in adherence to the National Action Plan for Green Shipping. And what is that National Action Plan? It consists of 3 elements: policy instruments for promoting green shipping, infrastructure on green shipping, technology and solution for green shipping. So these are all some of the initiatives taken under this head, optimizing water usage and improving green cover. Next is improving solid waste management. How do you improve solid waste management? One thing is cleaning up. It's very simple. It's a proper motivation that has to be done. See, this waste is generated in the port. All this waste, domestic waste, sweeping, garden waste, treated plant residues, packing material, right? So how do you collect? How do you segregate? How do you transport it, right? And how do you process it? So this becomes a big problem. And how many of us in India, we segregate the solid waste, we segregate the waste. This is for plastic and this is a degradable, this is not degradable. Right? Biodegradable, not biodegradable. We do not do that. But that has to be done. But it can be done. It is not enough motivation should be there. So that once when the motivation is there, right, that is possible. And the initiative is strengthen solid waste and plastic waste management program to improve waste segregation, recycling and reuse in alignment with Swachh Bharat mission. That's one of the greatest mission that Government of India has followed to clean everywhere. Clean streets, clean city, smart city, clean port. So Swachh Bharat mission is one of the successful mission that Government of India has rolled out a couple of years back, and it is still in process in a very great way. And promote waste to wealth. I was talking about circular economy, right? So these are all some of the initiatives, some of the points which is to ponder, and we see that how we really implement it with tooth and nail. There is nothing question, no second thought about it. Suppose you implement, you get 1 crore rupees, and you segregate the waste and you drop it in the particular bin. Somebody will pay you 1 lakh rupees. Everybody will do it. Only thing, the motivation, the balance element is missing. So we have to get motivated with this, and we have to join hands with the government to make the city port clean, because next 40 years you are going to be there. Either you could be on board, or you manage the vessel, or you manage the third party logistics or whatever. Next 40 years all students will be there in Maritime. So I want you to contribute to the maritime growth with all these initiatives implementing. So dredging is an important aspect. We cannot miss dredging. Especially in Cochin Port and Kolkata Port, there is a maintenance dredging. There are two types of dredging. One is capital, another is maintenance. The Setu Submarine project is capital dredging and maintenance dredging. I should maintain the draft to the channel and I have to do it continuously. It's very expensive. Dredging is expensive. Now, all the more expensive is all these residues which I get out of dredging. Where will I throw it? Can I throw it in the sea? Or can I throw it on the land? Where will I? Where and creation of new land. The best example would be Wellington Island, where our IMU Kochi campus is situated. It is a reclaimed land. Dredging and all the material was put and a new land was formed by Bristol. People who know the history should be knowing. See, this is one of the, they have used some long time ago, right? So that's one way to handle dredging waste. And you have it can be used for manufacturing. Some sands could be used for manufacturing, and there's a huge way of. There are people who have done it. I have taken some on that, and I will tell you what they have done. See, they have come. See, for beach nourishment through bypassing of littoral sand. So East Coast ports, land reclamation. They have filled the land, and they used this material for construction. I have quoted Cochin Port. Why? Because that's what they have done. It's a man-made island. Wellington Island in Cochin is a man-made island. People have gone to Cochin campus. IME Cochin campus is in Wellington Island. Port is also in Cochin, in Wellington Island. Man-made island. So this is one of the standing testimony of what has happened in the dredging material. It has to be recycled. So the initiative taken by the government is employing sustainable dredging disposable mechanism to improve dredging material that is recycled and reused at ports. How do you reuse? And a lot of research centers has to come to find out how it could be recycled, how it could be reused. And who is going to do the research? People who are sitting here. The people who are sitting in maritime universities only can think of it. We require so many think tanks, and these are all think tanks which will definitely contribute to the economic growth or to maritime economy by reducing fossil fuel. That's what more important. No? So that's possible. Zero accident safety program. So this is the buzzword in any talk right now. You take any container from people are talking about zero accident safety program. And it has to be continuously monitored. Because how do you do the zero accident? See, I have taken some 6 or 7 important aspects in zero accident. One is risk assessment and audit. So risk assessment and audit is done by ensuring staff and worker safety through self-audit and process re-engineering. Self-audit is required, is it not? See, what we do is once when you come to this university, you go before the mirror and see whether your blazer is okay, your tie is okay, right? Your specs is okay, whether you have put a proper, This is what we do. We see whether we are looking good before the mirror. Same thing we should do self-audit. So what is the risk? So what should I do? Whatever action I do, whether it is right or not, self-introspection. How many of you have gone to your house and said today what work I have done, whether I have done properly, accident-free, or whether my work will not have a problem for others? How many of us has done that? Self-introspection. Is it not? So accident-related equipment and safety, reduced equipment handling related to safety accidents. So how do you handle the equipments? Safety with respect to hazardous material. Yeah, ensure safety handling of hazardous material. That's a very important thing. So how do you handle safety material? If you don't I'll tell you one thing. If you do not handle safety properly, most of the employees who are in that terminal, dangerous cargo terminal or this terminal where there is an accident, they are highly stressful. You know why they are highly stressful? Can anybody give me the reason why they are highly stressful? People who are handling dangerous cargo in the port. Can anybody tell me one reason? What is the reason? Why they are stressful in the port? It is not that they do not know the job. I have some 4 points to tell people are stressful in ports, especially when we talk about accident safety program. First is, they should know what they are supposed to know, that they do not know. And second is, what they do not know, that also they should know. So I should know what I am supposed to know, and I should also know what I do not know. Second is, my Why is problem is only 90%. Sorry, problem is only 10%. How we react to is 90%. Normally we try to do the 90%. So I repeat, problem is only 10% and how do we react to it is 90%. We normally react, we don't act. You become stressful. And this is another important thing. 70% of the time we think about others, how to spoil others. Simple. You'll become stressful only, man. How can you be without stress, you tell me. So now, when you're talking about zero accident safety, these things should be removed from your vocabulary. You should not have it in your mind. Then you'll be stressful only. So where is the question of safety? You will have an accident. Because your mind, body, soul is not concentrated. There is no focus. So gentlemen and ladies of the house, this risk assessment audit, self-audit, and this training and safety has to be complied, has to be taken very seriously. Right? Has to be taken very seriously. Then you see that there will not be any accident. That's what I said, self-audit, self-introspection. That's important. So initiative is conduct periodical risk assessment. That's what I've given. Marine terminal management and self-assessment programs to ensure zero accidents at Indian ports and ensure better management of hazardous material. So this is one thing. So safety training, continuously people should be engaged in safety training because somebody should talk on safety, then one fellow you'll become a safety person. What is required is continuously we have to teach or you have to go a training under a proper expert. So the government taken initiative is strengthen training program for port workers through two prolonged approach, mandatory induction training and periodic. It is mandatory, nothing is called optional, it's compulsory. Then there is a possibility of reducing accident and it can tend to zero. Process re-engineering. So completely overhaul the entire system. You have a engineering, completely re-engineering. So business process re-engineering. Maybe my management student should be knowing there's something called BPR, business process re-engineering. Completely re-engineering the entire system to suit zero accident. Right? Safety programs. What is required is that. See, I will tell you why people are not interested. I will tell you why people are not interested. And the problem with in re-engineering is when we talk about people who are there working on re-engineering, they keep postponing things. Not we also do. We postpone certain things. Why do we postpone things? Because we do not like the climate. That's why we postpone. Anything which we like, we do it immediately. So we are not wedded to that. So since you do not like the job, you are not passionate about it, you keep postponing it. So it has an impact. It has an impact on this. So process re-engineering is one important element where we have to adhere to. There are some gaps. When you do a re-engineering, you have some gaps and you have to fill up those gaps. The initiative is conduct process re-engineering by redesigning material handling operation at Indian ports to reduce physical hazard at Indian ports. Yes, it's completely digitalized, right? Even documentation has to be digitalized. Web-based ERP, right? Implementing EDI in all ports. And there is no manual documentation at all. Everything is digitalized. Then you see how things will work out. And disaster management. So we should also have a very strong disaster management plan. In case of any emergency, how will you handle it? So an effective disaster management plan can help to minimize the loss in terms of human lives, assets and environmental. So we should have an enough disaster management plan in ports so that it can work wonders and can minimize accidents and improve safety. Occupational health is what it is. I was telling you what is occupational health. People who work in coal mine, people who work in iron ore terminal, people who work in sulfur terminal. Most of the people who work in sulfur terminal, I'm just talking about a bulk or MOP terminal, muriate of potash, or fertilizers, right? They have eye problem. That's a health hazard. What will you do? And Government of India has given, ports have taken some initiative to help them out. I will tell you a story in one of the port. Out of politeness, I will not point out which port it is. So people who are working in iron ore terminal and sulfur terminal, there was an audit and they found that they have to reduce this type of hazard. So one medical doctor, he came out with a solution. He said, drinking morning and evening milk with 2 bananas, right, will reduce the impact on the human life. So port came out with a program. So people who are working in these terminals will be administered 2 glasses of milk and 2 bananas in the morning as well as at the end of the shift. But it went on very well. But after 6 months, all the training and they came. So we do not want banana and milk. We want equivalent to what you give me allowance. So we will take milk and banana because milk and banana served by the port is not up to the mark. Give me the money. So government board decided to give money to them because they want to reimburse. It was added in the salary slip. What happened? Nobody took banana, nobody took milk. The purpose was completely defeated. And continuously these people had this health hazard and health problem, and it was very difficult to make things round in this case. So people, we have to properly educate them what exactly the health is. So health service, medical monitoring, regular medical monitoring program, and we have to improve health infrastructure. That will help. That will help the occupational health at ports could improve to a very larger extent. No, just go back. Otherwise I will do it, don't worry. I will do it. Huh? So some of the initiatives taken by the ministry to implement special medical or occupational health service aimed at providing swift essential safety aid to port workers, to implement a medical monitoring program for port workers through active pre-screening and regular workers health documentation, and to enhance infrastructure capabilities like hospitals, bed and stuff with via PPP. You know, all major ports, they have an extraordinary, very well good hospitals they have. One of the best hospitals most of the ports have. So in that we are very happy, and the only thing is more infrastructure can be developed on this. So real-time centralized monitoring, build a real-time monitoring program to track key health safety environment, key performance indicators across ports and shipyards aimed to reduce emission, improving safety and promoting collaboration. And I will summarize whatever I have discussed. These are all the key intervention, 8 key intervention which in this 9th chapter Government of India has discussed, and I will sum up this. So renewable energy, make India major ports green and sustainable by increased use of renewable energy, air quality improvement, improving usage of clean fuels and other measures at port, water usage optimization, developing water treatment infrastructure and employing water conservation technique across port, improving solid waste management, improving waste segregation, recycling and reuse, and promoting waste to wealth in aligning with the Swachh Bharat mission, which is a very popular in India and it's a very successful mission also. So dredging material recycling, employing sustainable dredging disposable mechanism to improve dredging material that is recycled reuse. Classic example is Cochin Port. Zero accident safety program, improving safety across key elements, risk audit, safety equipment handling, process engineering, talking about BPR, and safety cultural and training. Occupational health management, drive medical monitoring of workers and strengthen occupational health centers and service across ports. Centralized monitoring system, driving compliance to international standards, conduct robust target setting and ensure central monitoring of KPI. As part of the Vision 2030, globally benchmark targets have been defined to help India improve safety and sustainability at ports. And of course, it could be tough sometimes, but the tough gets going. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us on the Maritime India Vision 2030 and the green shipping practices. The audience has greatly benefited from your informative session and several instances quoted. Let us again give a big round of applause to Dr. M. Sekhar. We thank all the speakers for their valuable insight and contribution. May I now request all the speakers to kindly occupy the seats on the dais for a question and answer session. request the volunteers to circulate the mic so that the audience can ask questions to any of the speakers.
Can you hear me? First of all, welcome to the Erasmus team, especially Mr. Janssen. We've been pronouncing it wrong. J should be pronounced as Y in Europe. So, Maurice, sorry for that. Thank you very much for that. My name is Professor Kishore. My question is to you. First of all, let me congratulate you on an excellent presentation. I love the part about practical implementation of the goals, SDGs, which is really very good. Rather than reclaiming land, as we know, thereby reducing the economical impact. But with the High Seas Treaty 2023 coming in across the world, now reclaiming the seas too, especially with the polluter-based principle. So, as a port developer, how do you see this balance could be maintained?
You mean when you expand ports into the sea, how you can then still remain in balance?
Yeah, especially with the High Seas Treaty signed in 2023, wherein the sea is going to be a challenge. To reclaim into the sea is going to be a challenge with this going towards SDG goals. Is there some way we can balance these two?
Yeah, I mean, there in what I learned from the database. So let's first stick to the facts. We see port development projects expanding into the sea, where they are able to maintain and conserve the nature. Yeah, so that could be a coral reef, or that could be, let's say, a natural landscape. And that is also for a reason, or that could also be mangroves. So mangroves, for instance, is a very good way of storing CO2. Yeah, so if you expand into the sea, and at the same time you are keeping or even restoring the mangroves that are storm surge breakers, so they break the storm for the people living behind on the coastline. This is one value. That second, it is storing CO2. So if you want to go to net zero, one of the ways to compensate, if you haven't reached that goal yet, and you're still using some fossil trucks for logical reasons, because you cannot replace everything at the same time. To compensate that, you can do something with the carbon credits. Yeah, so the carbon saving offsets the carbon emissions from your operations. This is just one of the examples, basically, that you can balance them in a way. Is that an answer to your question?
I was going to answer questions which are coming in from Cochin, from Dr. Jayan. So he says, how maritime supply chains adapted to the latest technology like AI, IoT, blockchain, and how much has the pandemic contributed to this? I think, actually, I don't think that COVID contributed much to that. So we see some of these initiatives. We are quite active with blockchain developments in Rotterdam, although I think we're also seeing some of the shortcomings of blockchain technology. IoT is growing, but it has been on the table already for quite some time. So I don't think necessarily that COVID has promoted a lot of these techniques. What COVID has promoted is remote meeting software and that kind of thing. So remote teaching, remote meetings, remote, lot more, let's say, remote monitoring, a lot more of those kinds of developments, which do not necessarily impact the supply chain so much, but much more the way we currently educate and work, I think. So that would be my opinion. And there is a second question: how was container shortage? Sorry, there's lots of questions. How was container shortage and last mile connectivity issue European ports faced during pandemic?
Yeah, okay, so this is, I think, one of the big issues that we were faced with that made everybody realize we had a problem, which is there is no empty container availability anymore. Because due to all this surge in demand and all these empty containers were pushed back to Asia as quickly as the shipping lines could get their hands on them. So for the export cargoes, there was no container availability. The result is export cargo started piling up, and so empty container availability is one of the major issues, I think, that contributed very much to the uncertainty and the strange ordering behavior that I talked about, and also the congestion problems that we've seen in many ports. And lots of containers not being picked up as a result, cargo staying in the container instead of being taken out. So empty containers, in that sense, I have a student currently working on the interaction between full container traffic and empty container traffic, and this being a topic that has been on the table for decades, is still an interesting signal if something in the shipping industry is not entirely well managed. Then yeah, you will see it very quickly in the empty container availability, I would say. Yeah, let's go back to the room.
Yes, question on that.
Firstly, I would like to thank honorable speakers for the very informative session today. I have a question for Mr. Morris. So, since you were talking about ecosystems and sustainability, recently I thought this will be apt to ask. I heard about offshore wind farms. So, I have heard that they are more energy efficient for generation, and also like they have greater consistency. Also, they are really good for job creation in the industry. But I also came about the disadvantages of it, like the cost of building, since it's a very capital intensive. Also, the exhaust from the ships, which will be involved in building it, it will be very huge. So, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah. So you talk about wind parks or wind propulsion on ships? Offshore wind parks. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can speak for what's happening in front of our coastline. A lot of wind parks are currently built, and interestingly, the first wind parks that were built were actually had to be subsidized. And now you see that the wind parks basically are so, let's say, bankable. Yeah? So the business case for a wind park is done without having a subsidy from the government. That's a good thing. You also talked about innovation. I think the wind parks and also the offshore wind as a new type of part of the ocean economy. Yeah? That's how I see it. It's part of the blue economy. The ocean provides for the wind, so to say, and for the space. Hence, you get very efficient energy at very low cost. The downside, of course, is yeah, the lack of horizon. Yeah? I was at the beach last week in the Netherlands, and there were all kind of wind parks in front of me. And it struck me because this is a very popular beach, and I was the first time that I was there when I saw the windmills. And so, yeah, it is kind of what we call horizon pollution. And the question is, of course, we cannot create a perfect world. And let's say all the good things also have some negatives. But I do think we have to, when we're designing things, we have to acknowledge that indeed there could be some negative consequences there. And this is what we also call inclusive port development. You include multiple stakeholders so that you understand the whole value, the different perspectives on value. Yeah? So a tourist has maybe a value of enjoying the horizon and enjoying the seascape and the beaches and so. But of course, at the end of the day, when he comes home, he wants that everything is working, electrified, air conditioning. So Yeah, but I think it's part of talking about it with stakeholders right from the design phase, and not like, yeah, now we have a wind farm in the back garden. Yeah, it provides cheap energy, so learn to live with it. That's not the approach that I think we should follow. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Hello. Sir, I wanted to ask you all that with this focus on green shipping and green ships, are we really focusing on making things greener? Like, for example, when we are talking about LNG ships, we are considering the possible threat of CH4 emissions. So I would like to ask that, should we focus on the existing problems, should we focus on the existing things, or should we build better things? Like, for example, we are having the existing problems, we are going to introduce newer problems. So what should we do actually? I would like to ask you that.
I think we should innovate. But let me explain. What you currently see when you're talking about alternative fuels in the shipping industry, you see an abundance of fuel technologies trying to make ships, build ships, and at the same time limit different types of emission. And what we learned from LNG ships in particular, we also learned that it comes with methane slips, right? So some emissions that, okay, CO2 is maybe a little bit reduced, not so much. NOx is reduced drastically, so that's good. But yeah, if you then have methane, which is even more stronger in terms of greenhouse gas than CO2, yeah, we're not getting so far. So what we see is an abundance of other fuel propulsion technologies, including WASP systems, wind-assisted propulsion, including all kind of safety efficiency, energy efficiency, methanol, hydrogen even. And then you come into a situation, what do you do as a ship owner? Because where are you going to place your money on what kind of technology? And this is the main challenge currently that we see with ship owners, that there's so much technology innovation going on. There's also ship owners who say, well, let's leave it for the moment. We will see which is going to mature and going to be adopted most in the industry, and then we make the investment. Of course, I don't really agree to that strategy either. I think we need to be adaptive.
Panelists, some more questions are not answered in the chat box. Can you look into the chat box?
There is a question on the...
Yeah, there's a question from Dr. Jain from Kochi. Are our ports ready by the European standards implementing decarbonization initiative? Where are we now? So with Europe and America, okay. That's a very good question, Dr. Jain. My compliments to you. So the question is, we are ready to implement. Overnight we can bring AG. Overnight we can bring automated cranes. Only problem is labor issue. Only problem is stakeholders issue. I will tell you a simple, just happens, a practical thing which happened when I was in the port. So you have a truck which comes with a loaded container into the terminal. That will offload the container and it will go empty. Empty truck will come inside, pick up the import container and go. So we told them it is not right, so we have to reduce this carbon footprint and all those things. So what we do is a truck which is coming inside with a container will drop the container for export and pick up an import container and go out. All the Trailer Operator Association went for a strike. This has happened in one of the major ports. That should not happen. See, when I want to put a green initiative and I want to implement, it's easy to, overnight it could be changed. Any infrastructure, little bit of capital thing that we can manage, the PPP or any private participation, or I will go for a GDR, or I will go for a Euro issue and I will manage the fund. Problem is when we implement, nobody should protest. So that's how it is. Because most of the people have a wrong notion in mind. Anything which comes, any digitalization comes, there is a sense of unemployment. It is not the case. It will give future employment. When computers was introduced in India, everybody protested that one computer can do 100 people's job. That is very true. But because of computer, there is a lot of employment, maybe more than 1 million, more than 2 million employments have been taken. And these 2 million people who are in the computer-based industry will not go to central or state government asking for a job. So at that time, when this was, I'm talking about a way back. So when computers were introduced, everybody has protested. But that is not the truth. So we can easily automate. There is every possibility infrastructure could be built overnight. I mean, I'm a little exaggerating on, but that's possible. Problem is with how the employees, how the laborers, how the stakeholders will respond, will react to it. That's where the problem is. So I think I have addressed Dr. Jayan's view. Second one, somebody, Vignesh has one. So when we are talking about port expansion, how can we reduce pollution related to port expansion and infra development in those areas? Katupalli, 53,000 crore. Okay, please. Yeah. Thank you, Vignesh. It's a good question. Whenever there is an infrastructure development, when there is a growth, there will be a little bit of carbon emission. But the question is, how do we control it? See, reduction and control should be our prime motive. See, when we are talking about Katupalli port, last mile connectivity should not be a problem. First mile connectivities are not a problem. From Kasimadu to Zero Gate in Chennai port, for 4 kilometers, 45 minutes is a 4 hours. 40 to 45 minutes is the time coming to Zero Gate. That should come down. So 4 kilometers should be passed within 4 minutes, 60 kilometers per hour. Even if it is 30 kilometers, it should pass through 8 minutes. It should not wait in the Kasimod junction for 45 minutes. That becomes a problem. That is a carbon emission. So that is greenhouse gas emission. That is what we want to reduce. Another factor is when the government of India is giving a facility, they have to utilize. So most of the major ports are connected with rain freight. And why the stakeholders are not using rain freight? Why they want to go by road? Classical example is DP World in Cochin port. Cochin port has spent, along with the government, has spent so much of money. There is a railway siding right from the outer of Cochin to the DP World. And nobody is using it. Only by road they are bringing the container. So 45 boxes into 90 boxes. Vehicle will be on the road. We can minimize that. So the question to ponder is, wherever the facilities create 2,000 crores at that time, I'm talking about 2,000 crores government of India has spent along with the Cochin port. But the facility is not being used. Very, very rarely they are using it. So that is the concern. We want to bring down that using these facilities and see how we can able to handle cargo movements so brilliantly so that we can minimize the greenhouse gas emission. Of course, if there is a growth, there will be, but see how we can able to minimize it. A continuous improvement should be there, BPR should be implemented, and so people are talking this. Sagarmala is one of the very successful vision of government of India, right? Port-led development. So the stakeholders should support the government and the port so that we can take it much more forward. Thank you. I think I have answered it.
I mean, also for the port authorities, there is a role there. If you are expanding, how can you make sure there's as little pollution as possible? And that is because if you're tendering out a contract, a new concession, there you have the power. Yeah, there you can say to the operator, because the operator is very result driven. Whatever I'm not saying profit driven. He's result driven. If you give the operators let's say a new set of indicators which include emission control, emission reduction, he will act upon it. He will act, of course, also upon his own profit. But as a government, you can also enforce then that performance. And I am sure an operator, a multinational like DP World or so, they know exactly how to optimize and make a terminal as most efficient as possible, which includes emission control. So, and that is quite an important given, I think, as a role for the port authorities.
constraint of time, this would be the last question.
Good afternoon, sir. When we talk about decarbonization, we often talk about indicators in that. There are different indicators like energy efficiency, existing sales, energy efficiency, operational indicators, to which there is one indicator like carbon intensity indicator. Many ship owners have problem regarding that. Ship owners say that CII is misleading indicator. So what do you take on that, sir?
Yeah, that's. I think you're exactly right. So you see a great need for the development of some of these globally accepted indicators, and also indicators that can be, how do you say, to some extent certified by certain parties. So there is a big industry popping up, providing some of these indicators, and actually they are not very good, right? CII is a well-known example, which is heavily criticized by a lot of experts. That it actually doesn't really give the right image. But yeah, I think that's a responsibility of all of us here and all experts in the maritime field is to actually say this, to do some sensible research that shows that these indicators are not good. And this, in the past, we have had some evidence that this works, right? That some of these indicators are then changed and improved. So I think it's typically in the shipping industry, I think that then we come up with some sort of global standard calculation that then everybody works with that is less than perfect. And I think we should not accept that, right? We should try to change and influence this and talk to the right people and say, look, this is an indicator that this is stupid and it's actually providing the wrong incentives. Yeah, but it is typical. I've seen that many times before in the shipping industry, in the global shipping industry, that this is sort of how we try to solve some of these problems, and it's should be criticized a bit more.
But I also believe you shouldn't make it too complicated, because we know ships burn fuel, and fuel, if you're talking about CO2 emissions and all kind of calculations to really find out how much CO2 was emitted, in the end it's the fuel consumption that is burned. And then you get, of course, into a discussion, where do you start measuring the emissions of the ship? Do you do that before you bunker, because then you know how much fuel gets in? Do you do that afterwards, or do you do that at the pipes, yeah, where the CO2 is emitted? I mean, what a ship owner or ship management is basically the ship operator, not really the ship owner. He's concerned about saving money, saving bunker, making sure he's passing over to the other side of the ocean as efficient as possible. In the end, how much he spends on bunker is of course a direct incentive also for the profitability. So I think regarding all kinds of schemes like the CII and stuff, the MRV system, the monitoring system of the European Commission, they measure fuel consumption. And of course there are some different tables also with CO2 emissions, but these are, let's say, calculated on the basis of the other column, which is the pure fuel consumption. So I think we also need to kind of be sensible to the, and also be rational in that discard.
Very good afternoon, and thank you very much for the excellent exposition of all the three professors. The question is to Professor Albert regarding the last slide you mentioned about the 24,000 TEU vessel, and there are some advantages and disadvantages, economies of scale. And I have read some article where we are aiming to establish 50,000 TEU vessel by 2050. How many ports are ready? Is it advantageous or not?
I think that will not happen, to be honest. I think, and so there are, McKinsey has written a report about this, and there's always some consultants who try to portray this idea. But I think 24,000 is the biggest vessel. You already see how we, in Rotterdam, we are struggling to handle this type of vessel and what this economies it actually creates. What we see, we've done some analysis on the order book, and what we see is that the industry is actually ordered, most of the ships they're ordering is 15, 16,000 TEU vessels, not 24. And they're still ordering some 24,000 TEU vessels, because I think they're still filling up the consortia, where some of the partners have brought in 24,000, but some others 21,000, and then they sort of start naming each other and say, well, let's all do 24. So there is still some 24,000 ships in the books, but there are no 20,000 TEU, 21,000 TEU, 22,000 TEU vessels on order. There is a big gap, a few 24,000 TEU vessels, then a big gap, and then 18, 16, 17,000 TEU vessels. So I think the industry itself has realized that 24,000 TEU vessels have a very limited range. Only a few ports where they can actually effectively be handled, and that they are trying to get back to a workhorse that is a bit smaller than that. So I don't believe at all that we are going to see 50,000 TEU vessels, but one of the first students that I supervised in, I don't know, 94 or so, did a thesis, a master thesis on what will be the biggest ship in the future, and he came up with 8,000 TEU. I think all the maritime economists among us have experiences like that, and obviously he was very wrong. So, but I don't think. I think the 24,000 TEU vessel creates so many problems already, especially in Europe, that I don't think we're going to see much bigger ships.
As we have come to the end of this seminar, we thank all of you for your wonderful participation, and we thank all the speakers for your knowledgeable contribution. May I now call upon Dr. B. Swaminathan, Head School of Maritime Management, to propose a vote of thanks.
Very good afternoon to all. Very good afternoon to all of you. I stand today with great gratitude and satisfaction as we conclude this informative international seminar on competitive landscape of the maritime industry. We, the faculty of School of Maritime Management, are deeply honored to have hosted the esteemed professors of Erasmus University, Rotterdam. Their insights into port management, supply chain management, and the future of the maritime sector is I would say, impeccable, invaluable, I would say. I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to these distinguished professors who have enriched our understanding of the subject matter. These takeaways are very important to remember as we progress. I thank my faculty colleague Dr. Shekhar for sharing his insights on Maritime India Vision 2030, focusing on decarbonization alone. Thank you very much, sir. Similarly, I am thankful to our diverse audience of maritime industry professionals, Mr. Ennarasu Karunesan, Mr. Balasubramanian, and other maritime professionals across the country through online. I am very much grateful to our director for having accepted to organize this international seminar and provided all the support to us in every stage of activity. I would like to thank the Pro Vice Chancellor, the then Director of Chennai campus, who has initiated this international seminar when he was the director. The Vice Chancellor of Indian Maritime University and also various campus directors, heads of the department, Captain Ganeshan Velaidam sir, and all other heads of the department across the campus. Faculty members, students, those who are pursuing BBA, MBA and BSc Nautical Science final year students, those who are assembled here, raised a very valuable questions to the international speaker. I would also like to thank the organizing committee, Dr. Lekha Ravi, Dr. Yamil Matthew. I primarily thank Dr. Uma Maheshwari who has taken all the initiative to conduct the program perfectly. She has sacrificed her convenience for the last 1 week. I really appreciate you, madam. Mrs. Girija, our team member, and the student volunteers, all the student volunteers, the completing team, every one of you, the entire team effort that makes the program very successful. Ultimately, I can say this seminar was a wonderful experience of learning, sharing and network building. Thank you once again, the esteemed guest, everyone, all the students across the campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have now come to the end of this well-participated seminar. We extend our appreciation to the audience for their active participation and thought-provoking contributions. Your engagement and enthusiasm have created a vibrant learning environment. Thank you, everyone. May I now request all to rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
May I now request all the speakers to occupy the front row in the auditorium for a group photo.
Thank you.